Hi, I'm Hobie1. This is Red Chair Reading. I'm reading the Black Book of Secrets. We're on chapter 16. Let's go. Fragment from the Memoirs of Ludlow Fitch. The city was gray from dirt and disease. Pagus Parvis existed in a gray light that was cast by clouds that never seemed to go away. I soon learned the weather in the region was varied little from what I had experienced the night I arrived, sitting as it was on the exposed side of a mountain, covered in snow 8 months out of 12, and rained on for the other 4. Pagus Parvis was not popular with outsiders, and those who lived there left it rarely, although rumors had reached them of a vehicle that moved by itself. They had not yet seen one of these great iron beasts, and the parallel tracks it rode on were not coming in the direction of Pagus Parvis. If given a choice, Pagus Parvians preferred to travel by horse and carriage, but that was a privilege of the few, so mainly they were on foot. If it had not been for Joe, there was little to keep me here, but still I began to think of it as home. My days as a pickpocket were long over, and I was glad not to have to thieve any more. I continued to wear Jeremiah's gloves and scarf. However, it was worth it to see how he stared whenever we met. At night, after supper, we would sit by the fire and talk. We discussed many things, but seldom reached any conclusions. Joe was a man of few expressions. His face rarely gave anything away, although he became quite animated when we talked about Saluki. That frog was treated like a queen. Joe fed her the finest bugs and snails and worms, and the sourdough boys were up almost every day just to fuss over her. We also talked about Jeremiah Ratchet. Whenever the shop bell rang, I had taken to guessing whether it would be a pledge or merely another complaint about Jeremiah. The blustering buffoon had practically the whole village beholden to him. He seemed to spend his days either threatening to evict his tenants or sending his masked men to do just that. Every time I heard his name, I became more and more frustrated that no one in the village seemed willing or able to challenge him. Why do you think the villagers tell you so much about Jeremiah Ratchet? I asked Joe. Because they are impatient. It was typically a brief reply. Sometimes conversations with Joe were like riddles. Jeremiah, he continued, is a heavy burden for a small place like this. Then why don't they do something? There are enough of them. Joe shook his head. Jeremiah is a cunning fellow. Each person is so caught up with his own predicament that he cannot see the true strength is in the crowd. To overthrow Jeremiah, they must work together. But he has them divided and held hostage to their fears. They believe he has informers in the village. Surely the villagers would not betray each other. No doubt they are forced to, said Joe. And because they cannot trust each other, they are unwilling to plot against Jeremiah, in case he finds out. They talk to me because I am a stranger and Jeremiah has no hold over me. In their desperation, they think I might save them from that scoundrel somehow. And will you? I asked. Silently, I willed Joe to take him on. However bad the situation, I cannot change the course of things, he replied, and would not be drawn on the subject any further. I cannot count the number of times Joe said this. It always left me wondering. Was he suggesting that he knew the course of things? And although he maintained that he was unwilling to bring about change, his very presence had already had a noticeable effect on the villagers. After all, he had come to Pagus Parvis a stranger, opened his shop, and in a matter of days, he had gained the respect and admiration of all around him. We were all drawn to him, like the moths that fluttered noisily outside the lighted windows at night. Some people make their presence known with loud voices or grand gestures, but Joe didn't have to do that. He was a soft-spoken man who didn't waste words, but you could just feel when he was near. As for how Joe made a living, well, that was a complete mystery to me. After all, what sort of business was it to give money away? And how else would you explain what he was doing? The window display was growing daily, but although he paid for many items, I rarely saw him sell anything. And then there was the Black Book of Secrets. Pagus Parvians were quick to take advantage of the service he offered, and at midnight Joe was handing out bags of coins to all and sundry. There were many secrets in Pagus Parvis. During the day, the place seemed almost more than what it was, a small mountain village. It was only in the house of darkness that it became obvious all was not well. All those wakeful nights I spent looking down the hill, I knew that behind the windows, each glowing lamp, each flickering candle, told a tale. Shadows moved across the curtains. Silhouettes paced in the dark, pressing their knuckles against their foreheads in frustration and guilt. Joe listened intently to every tale of woe, and regardless of the confession, he never passed judgment. I know he paid well, but I did not know upon what basis Joe calculated a secret's value. I did ask him once where his money came from, and he simply replied, inheritance, and made it clear the conversation was over. If this is interesting to you, please be sure to boop the like button. You'll help the video spread to other people, and thank you very much. Elias Sourdoff came up one night from the bakery and admitted that he had been cutting the floor with alum and chalk. That was worth 4 shillings. When Lily Weaver came by and said she had been cheating her customers out of cloth by using a short measure, he gave her 7. Even Polly paid us a visit, sneaking out of Ratchet's house late one night to admit to stealing cutlery. Joe and I knew this already. Polly had pawned a knife and fork only 2 days previously, but it wasn't until she was gone that we noticed Jeremiah's initial on each piece. I had to admire Polly's cheekiness. She knew we couldn't put them in the window, though wouldn't I have loved to have seen Jeremiah's face at the sight of his own cutlery on display. Instead, Joe used them for his dinner. Each night, Joe stoked up the fire, and I set the bottle of liquor and 2 glasses on the mantel, and I took the black book from its hiding place and filled the inkwell. Then we sat and waited, he in his chair by the fire and I in mine at the table. There was hardly a night went by without a knock on the door as the church bell struck 12. I played my part. As the villagers gave their confessions, I sat in the shadows and wrote it all down, word for word. Sometimes it was hard not to shout out at what I was hearing. Every so often I would sneak a look at Joe, sitting by the fire, resting his elbows on the arms of the chair, his fingers slightly touching. His face was like a blank page. Whatever was said, very occasionally he would bend back his forefingers for a split second, make circles in the air with the tips, and then bring them back together again. But not once did his expression change. Well, he has a great poker face, that Joe. That's the end of chapter 16. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you in chapter 17.